If you own a credit card, you may have noticed that spending money on the card somehow feels better than spending cash or direct debit from a bank account. This is so because the bankers who invented the credit card understood the psychology of how we organize and spend money, which is referred to as mental accounting. While the banks use this knowledge to make us spend more money and create more business for them, we can use the same knowledge to make better financial decisions for ourselves. In this video, I will explain what mental accounting is and how it impacts our decisions. I will then look at the workings of mental accounting to arrive at some strategies that can help us make better decisions. But first, let's look at an example of mental accounting in one of the greatest crime dramas on TV of all times, Breaking Bad. Both Walter White and Jesse Pinkman made millions of dollars selling meth over the course of 5 seasons. Walter always had a clear goal for what he wanted to do with the money: pay for his cancer treatment and support his family after his death. To this end, he carefully protected and laundered his money and ensured that his family receives it. But for Jesse, all this money came unexpectedly as a windfall, and therefore he had no clear goals or use for it. So he spent a large part of it on buying a house to spite his parents, blew it on parties so he felt less lonely, did not care when people tried to steal it, and at one point even drove around town throwing bundles of cash out of his car window. The contrast between how the two characters spent their money is a result of differences in mental accounting. Before we move forward, remember, if you would like to watch more of such content, support the channel by liking, commenting and subscribing. Now, let's get started. Mental accounting describes the way that we mentally organize, evaluate, and keep track of our financial choices. One of the most important findings about mental accounting is that while money doesn't come with any labels, we put mental labels on it by categorizing funds into different accounts, and then we treat money in these different accounts as distinct and non-interchangeable. For example, say you bought a movie ticket worth $20 in advance, but on the day of the show, you lose the ticket. You were supposed to go alone. Now, would you buy a new ticket or drop the plan? Probably depends on how much you were looking forward to the movie, right? Now imagine that you did not buy the ticket in advance, but plan on going for the show and buying the ticket at the theater. On the day of the show, you unfortunately lose $20. Would you cancel the movie plan? Probably not, right? The two things seem unrelated. But think about it. In both cases, you lose $20, whether in cash or kind, and end up on the day of the show without a ticket. But as you see now, we have different mental accounts for cash and kind, and we do not treat $20 in cash the same as $20 in kind. Now, we categorize funds in many different ways, such as based on their origin. For example, a bonus payment or an unexpected income like a lottery win are considered windfall gains, and we are more likely to spend such funds than regular income. We also categorize funds by their intended use. For example, we set budgets for various activities like entertainment, health, food, etc. And we segregate funds for these such that they can't be used interchangeably. Sometimes we assign funds to a specific budget category based on an association with their source. For example, we are more likely to spend windfall income on luxury goods and regular income on essential goods. And lastly, we categorize funds by grouping choices and outcomes together to form a mental account. For example, while deciding the budget for a purchase, we may only consider the purchases made on that shopping trip or all the purchases made in all the stores during the entire month. Now, this is known as choice bracketing, and we may either bracket narrowly by considering only a small set of choices or broadly by grouping together a larger set. One of the common ways we bracket choices is by grouping funds together based on the timing of their use. Choices that are distant are more likely to be put into different mental accounts, while choices that are closer to each other are more likely to be integrated into the same account. Time-based bracketing also plays an important role in determining the period over which we evaluate and reconcile our mental accounts. For example, daily, weekly, monthly, etc. Another key finding of mental accounting is that we experience pain or displeasure while making a payment, which is similar to the pain of losing money. But while making a payment, this pain is balanced out by the pleasure of consumption. And when we pay in advance, we anticipate the pleasure of future consumption to offset the pain of payment. When we actually consume something that we have already paid for, we don't have to think about the payment at all, which makes the consumption feel almost free. which, as you would have noticed, is paradoxical. Now let's try to understand what these findings mean for our decision making. Let's start by looking at some of the undesirable impacts of mental accounting. When an expense doesn't fit into any of the existing mental accounts, we may use the flexibility by putting it into an account which allows us to cheat on our own spending goals. Similarly, we may decide that small and infrequent expenses do not even need to be accounted for. For example, that $5 monthly fee you pay on that app which you barely use. But I mean, who cares for such a small amount, right? This kind of omission and flexibility in mental accounting can lead to overspending, and that's how they get us. Next, inflexible budgets can also be counterproductive because they prevent us from reallocating funds based on actual need. For example, our transportation budget on a trip may be spent up to its limit and fall short, while the food budget may have unspent funds remaining. As a result, we may end up taking an uncomfortable and time-consuming transport option instead of just using the extra funds from the food budget. Next, narrow bracketing of choices, for example, on a daily basis rather than a monthly basis, can lead to myopic decision making, wherein we miss out on long-term opportunities in pursuit of short-term immediate gains. For example, say a cab driver has a daily earning goal after which he stops driving. Now, on busy days, he'll earn quicker and stop driving quite early. But if he stays out longer, on busy days, he might earn enough to take much more time off on regular days. So a weekly or monthly earning goal might be a better strategy than a daily earning goal for this driver. Next, due to the pain of payment, we feel compelled to consume things that we have already paid for, even if it's not a pleasurable experience. For example, if we order too much food, we feel compelled to finish it even if overeating may cause discomfort. Indeed, we often prefer to pay in advance to avoid experiencing the pain of payment during consumption. For example, we may pay for an annual gym membership but not end up using it enough and therefore overspending. And lastly, categorizing funds can constrain our choice set because we often end up spending money based on where it comes from. So when we receive a gift card, we tend to use it on luxurious or indulgent items, even in cases where it might be much more useful for us to spend it on regular items that we actually need. To be able to avoid the negative impacts of mental accounting on our decisions, we need to understand how it works and why it works this way. Let's start by looking at its cognitive causes, which are the psychological mechanisms that explain these tendencies. Mental accounting has many similarities with how we categorize events and objects in general. Categorization is a way of organizing information into groups based on commonalities. In general, the more similar two items appear to be, or closer they occur to each other, the more likely they are to be associated with the same category. We categorize time, food consumption, and even social behavior. Next, for a given transaction, we tend to evaluate and track payments and consumption separately. We track payments in terms of the perceived value of the deal. It is the difference between the price paid and the reference price that we expect to pay. The reference price is typically based on the memories of past paid and seen prices. Now, sales and discounts work on this and drive purchases by making the deal seem more attractive. We track the benefits of consumption in terms of the value of the good obtained for us relative to its price. It is the pleasure derived or anticipated from consumption minus the pain of paying. If the payment and consumption occur close to each other, the consumption will be less pleasurable than if they are separated in time. In terms of the neural basis of mental accounting, the parietal lobe seems to play a key role in the process of categorization, while the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is involved in budget-based decision making. Subcortical regions like striatum, amygdala, and insula are involved in tracking the value of financial outcomes and choices in terms of pain and pleasure. Next, let's try to understand why mental accounting works this way. After all, for us to have inherited these tendencies from our ancestors, they must offer some evolutionary advantages. Firstly, categorizing funds helps in quick recall and judgment of relevant information, which reduces the mental effort required for financial decisions. In the absence of such categorization, we would need to assess our full financial portfolio for nearly any financial decision. The budgeting process also helps us rationally allocate funds between competing uses and needs. Second, the budgeting system acts as a self-control device by pre-committing our spending towards our long-term goals and thereby helping us resist the temptation of other immediate consumption opportunities. Also, transaction-specific accounts help make sure that when we pay for something in advance, we end up consuming it and not wasting it in favor of some other more tempting consumption opportunity. And finally, based on the situation, bracketing financial outcomes separately or together can help us minimize the pain of losses. For example, if we have no choice but to experience multiple losses of similar nature, we prefer to experience them closer together in time, so we can bracket them together and treat them as a single loss, thus minimizing the mental displeasure. Credit cards use this tendency by facilitating a single integrated payment for all our purchases, rather than paying for each purchase directly from our bank account. But if the losses are not similar and cannot be bracketed together, we prefer to spread them apart in time to spread out the displeasure. In contrast, we prefer to spread similar gains apart and group dissimilar gains together to maximize the pleasure. Now we are in a position to look at some strategies to avoid the undesirable impacts of mental accounting and use it to our advantage. First, if consumption calls to mind thoughts of payment, the pain of payment is likely to limit consumption. Now this can be used as a self-control device. On the flip side, if we want to increase consumption, we should use measures that dissociate consumption from payment. Some financing methods, such as credit cards, weaken the coupling between payment and consumption, whereas others, such as cash payment, produce a tighter coupling. Flat rate pricing schemes such as unlimited internet access at a fixed monthly price also weaken coupling and are often preferred by consumers, even if it involves paying a higher price for the same amount of consumption. Next, while evaluating the affordability of a good, we compare its price with the amount of resources available for the purchase. But to estimate resources available, we consider mentally and physically accessible accounts rather than our total wealth. So a $50 purchase seems more affordable if we have $1,000 in our wallet than if we have $500. Having credit and debit cards increase the amount of resources that are accessible and therefore make purchases seem more affordable. Next, we tend to have a hierarchy of mental accounts based on how easy or tempting it is to spend money in those accounts. For example, food or entertainment budgets are more likely to be spent on other uses compared to health or emergency funds. Long-term savings and investment accounts generally tend to be completely off limits. Funds that are transferred to less tempting mental accounts are more likely to be saved. Next, narrow bracketing leads to less willingness to take risk because we evaluate deviations from our goals and expectations even for smaller choices and outcomes. This produces a fear of even smaller losses, which helps us stick to our goals. So narrow bracketing is good for self-control, but not for long-term planning wherein accepting some risk is beneficial. For example, a new business takes some time to become profitable, but a businessman who's not willing to accept some initial losses will not be able to pursue long-term opportunities. On the other hand, with broad bracketing, falling short of our goals in one outcome can be balanced out by exceeding our goals in another outcome. So we are more willing to take risks, but we also feel less motivated towards our goals because we feel somewhat insured against losses in the long term. So depending on whether we want to take more risks or exercise more self-control, we can decide to bracket narrowly or broadly. And finally, the tendency to categorize is associated with analytical thinking style, while holistic thinkers tend to display more flexible mental accounting. Studies have shown that holistic thinking leads to a more comprehensive accounting process and avoids a lot of the undesirable impacts of mental accounting on our decision making. Let's conclude by looking back at the story of Jesse from Breaking Bad. As Jesse did not have any goals or planned use for the money he earned, he failed to categorize or budget it. He considered the money as windfall gains and therefore spent it on hedonic goods and experiences. As a result, the money slipped away from him before he even realized. Go watch this entertaining and masterfully crafted crime drama for the full story of Walter and Jesse's journey to the pinnacle as well as the dark depths of Albuquerque's drug trade. Thank you for watching the video. Remember to like, comment and subscribe. And before the libertarian paternalists come to nudge you, you better go nudge yourself. See you next time.